have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup, and we have another week full of news.
Yes, and a lot of it
is this going out the way it looks on this monitor, pink and blue? Well, I'm going to trust it's not.
Okay. And a lot of the news is outside the United States. The president of Nigeria signed this week a draconian anti-gay bill into law. You get 10 years in prison for going to a gay meeting, 14 for participating in a gay wedding. Dozens have already been rounded up and arrested.
Doesn't look good there. We're still waiting to hear what happens with the Uganda bill and whether that gets signed. And in Cameroon, a gay man there who had already been imprisoned for being gay is now dead from lack of medical treatment after he was released.
Now, my co-host Ann thinks this was another stunner. You may have been surprised when you read it. A federal judge in Oklahoma has overturned the constitutional ban in Oklahoma on same-sex marriage. The case has been going on for 9 years.
More details in a minute. And back to Utah, which we thought maybe would be the headline this week. Now it's down to the fourth story because two things happened there. The state said it would not recognize the same-sex marriages already legally performed, but our federal attorney general, Eric Holder, said the United States government will.
We'll bring you his message. And there was a big protest down there in Utah by our folks. A transgender student in Contra Costa, California, is being prosecuted for assault after defending herself from a beating.
Not the first time that's happened. And back overseas, the U.S. State Department has issued a formal warning to people planning to go to the Winter Olympics in Sochi, Russia, about a bunch of dangers there, including what LGBT people need to watch out for.
Now, while some of you celebrated the Feast of Three Kings recently, we are going to review King Lear, starring Frank Langella, and She is King, about Billie Jean King.
And we'll just let you know for your calendars that on next week's show, we have a special guest, Sean Strube, a long time AIDS activist, has written a new memoir and history called Body Counts. And Sean will be here next week at the top of the show for a lengthy interview.
So we start with Nigeria.
Yes,
now,
we do.
We've been tracking for years Uganda, Nigeria, and other countries there considering horrible anti-gay laws. I mean, homosexuality isn't legal in any of these countries. Obviously, in South Africa, it's protected by the Constitution. But terrible laws, but they get to the point, where they pass them or they talk about them, but they don't sign them. Well, this week in Nigeria, President Goodluck Jonathan, there's a picture of him we have there, signed this anti-gay bill. It's called the Same-Sex Marriage Prohibition Act. But what it does is
much broader.
It criminalizes gay clubs, associations, and organizations with penalties, I think, of 10 years in prison for that.
Yes.
14 years in prison for being a part of a gay wedding.
Yes.
What else?
Well, if you are simply out on the street and demonstrably gay, they can round you up. This really is a law that will send you to prison if you can be proved to be gay. And the reason we know this is because it turns out that even before passing this law, they started enforcing this kind of procedure. They rounded up a few gay men and they tortured them. And they made them come up with a list of other gay men. And
Over
they came
100.
168, I believe.
Yep.
And then they started going out and going after them. And they have now arrested just as this law was being passed, starting before it was being passed, several dozen of these gay men, the word is they'll go after lesbians eventually, they're starting with the gay men, in the northern part of Nigeria.
Where they've already got Sharia law, where they can stone you to death for being gay, not under this law, but under their own law.
We'll see how that plays
Now,
out.
an AIDS counselor in the northern region said that the arrests were sparked by a rumor that the U.S. paid $20 million to gay activists to promote same-sex marriage there.
Panic. These things are built on panic. And
Yes.
whether it's Putin passing these laws in Russia or Uganda or Nigeria or wherever, it's all about scapegoating us, scaring the public, putting out these rumors.
I wouldn't say it's based on panic. They already hate us. We're an unknown group there. It's almost impossible to live an open gay life in a lot of these places. So we're just these unknown people there that you can characterize as evil.
But that's the point, evil and dangerous.
So when Good Luck Jonathan gets in some political trouble, he's not going to veto or ignore a bill that is unanimously passed by the Nigerian legislature.
Well, I think it goes just beyond unknown. It's not just unknown, it's that we are portrayed as dangerous, satanic, people who must be eliminated or, evil will befall the country.
Hitler, of course, did this to the Jews when people did know Jews and, had lived with Jews. And obviously, Jews lived openly, but was still able to do that to Jewish people.
By these scary stereotypes. I've seen some of the literature that was used against Jews and the cartoons and the anti-Semitic literature.
The protocols of the elders of Zion.
Well, it's all about scaring the rest of the population so that they will come after us because they see that as their duty then.
Now,
I didn't realize, I have to say, in my ignorance, that Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa.
Yes, and it has the highest rate of AIDS. I think it's the second highest in the world, and it has the highest rate of AIDS in Africa.
It's also a huge oil producer, and that becomes a complicating factor here, too.
They don't need us.
Well, they don't need us, but do we need them? And is that why we are unlikely to cut off our relationship with them?
Well, here's the thing. The U.S. and the U.K. have expressed concern.
Deeply concerned
about the law.
Secretary of State Kerry.
Nigerians, gay people who can leave, are leaving, seeking asylum elsewhere in the world. By the way, this bill is not as bad
as the Uganda bill.
Exactly, which is still awaiting President Museveni's signature. The Nigerian bill passed back in December 17th.
We didn't hear about it till now because they didn't publicize it.
The New York Times said that, in their editorial against this, said being gay can get a person lynched by a mob already in
Exactly.
Nigeria. And we mentioned the Sharia. Let's see.
Well, the U.S. government, because we hadn't heard this bill had been signed yet, we knew it had been passed, because we haven't heard that the Uganda bill has been signed yet, because we had some indications, it was clear that the U.S. government and other governments were trying to quietly behind the scenes pressure these governments not to sign these laws. But clearly that has not been enough.
Now, the Coalition for the Defense of Sexual Rights, which is the group of Nigerians and those concerned about Nigeria, have issued a long statement about this. They are because, when I posted this on Facebook, people said, sanctions, cut off the aid, all this kind of stuff. And they're saying, please don't do that. Don't antagonize the government further over this. Please work quietly behind the scenes to try to get this changed. That's what they're asking for.
Yes, but that's what people always ask for from inside. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying there is a tension, and sometimes outside pressure that is stronger can have an effect too.
Well, you got to listen to the people who are on the ground.
Well, look, in AIDS activism, there were people inside the government or inside pharmaceutical companies who said, just, work with them, be quiet.
That's very different. In the Russia situation, we certainly trump the fact that lots of Russians are supporting what we're doing in this country calling for, boycotts of the Olympics or whatever. I mean,
they don't want the Olympics boycotted
some do.
from inside Russia.
Some do.
And a lot don't.
The Pussy Riot woman said anybody who goes to the Olympics is a supporter of Putin and his thuggery.
And there are Russian gays who say no.
But we do trump the fact. I mean, tell
Trumpet?
me. Trumpet. Yeah, well. It is dicey. It is,
Yes, that's all
how
I'm
we
saying.
approach it. It is dicey how we approach it. How do you have an effect on these folks?
On another country. How do other countries have an effect on us for the stuff we do?
We're Bigfoot, and we don't respond to the. Well, anyway, for instance, UN AIDS said that the new law. They're trying to appeal to Good Luck Jonathan and saying it could harm, his own one-year-old initiative to fight AIDS. Because they've got 3.4 million people living with AIDS there. The UN's High Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillay, said, and this is a quote, "Rarely have I seen a piece of legislation that in so few paragraphs directly violates so many basic universal rights."
Exactly.
So this is heinous. It wasn't a good situation before, but this seems to have unleashed the hounds of hell, and now there's going to be this witch hunt, and that's why we're so concerned, and we're at a loss as to what to do.
Going even beyond the Russian law in giving permission to people all over the country to conduct these witch hunts and lynchings and everything else. It is going to make gay people
I believe it was Uganda, right, where they published all the names of people on the front page and all that kind of stuff in that paper.
And I think you'll see more of that in Nigeria.
Well, and it's not the only thing that's happening, a bad thing that's happening in Africa.
Well, we are worried still about Uganda because the legislature did pass what we refer to as the Kill the Gays bill there. There was a demonstration in London this last week where about 50 people showed up to demonstrate
Got
against
a picture of that?
The Uganda bill, asking the president not to sign it. I thought we had a chance, but now with this Nigeria thing, I'm no longer so optimistic.
Right. Well, maybe they're watching what the reaction is to this thing and how it's going to play out. And then there's Gabon, where 6 men who were arrested last month on suspicions of participating in a same-sex marriage were released when officials determined that no marriage had occurred. But this is the kind of thing that they're. It's like the Salem witch trials.
Even if people have their own private little ceremonies of celebration, it's not like anybody thinks those are legal marriages that anyone's trying to foist upon the populace of these countries.
Right. Right. I mean, there have been, there were many same-sex marriages in the United States, religious ceremonies that took place for years. I think a couple of states in the South actually tried to ban anybody who could preside over a marriage legally from doing that.
Even
like a minister or something. Yes, right. All right. Then
so did some of the religions.
Then there's the terrible situation in Cameroon, which Cameroon, by the way, is famous for basically having the most arrests around homosexuality than any country in Africa at this point. A gay man, and we have a picture of him, Jean-Claude Mbedi. He's 34. He was jailed for texting another man, "I am very much in love with you." So he was imprisoned for this, but he was eventually released from prison and sent to the hospital because he sought treatment for a hernia, and then he was removed from the hospital.
His family removed him. They said, "He's a curse. We should let him die."
Yes.
And so he did.
He did. He had developed the hernia in prison. He was released on medical grounds.
But I think this sums it up. The family of this guy regards him as a curse, literally someone who is going to be an evil influence on the success of the family, and therefore they want him dead to remove the curse.
The same thing has happened in Russia, where these people come out and then their families are just horrified, and some of them leave the country because they can't deal with the shame.
Well, I don't know if they're leaving the country, but certainly
Some of them are.
in this country, No, what I mean is from this country,
Yes.
the United States, there is certainly still plenty of shame felt by families.
And if you are feeling that shame, you should get a hold of parents and friends of lesbians and gays and go to a meeting and get over it.
because
They will help you.
There is no shame.
There is support.
Yeah.
Right.
Just a couple of other international stories before we move on to the other marriage headlines. Luxembourg may vote on marriage equality this year. The British Association of Christian Counselors has barred conversion therapy as inappropriate and ineffective.
In Australia, in the Victoria, it's the first Australian state to expunge convictions for consensual gay sex.
Gay men
haven't done that here.
convicted of consensual sodomy can apply to have their record expunged. And in Zimbabwe, a court has ordered the police to return property they seized in a raid on the headquarters of GALS, Gays and Lesbians of Zimbabwe, in 2012. That's amazing.
So we'll talk about Russia later?
So maybe, maybe Nigeria and Uganda and Cameroon can learn a lesson from Zimbabwe. Wait, don't quote me on that.
Okay.
Marriage news.
Oklahoma.
Where
Oklahoma.
the wind comes sweeping down the plain.
People have been playing those tunes. Oklahoma, you may remember, in 2004, one of the early subscribers to this overwhelmingly passed a constitutional amendment against same-sex marriage. So there's been a case there for 9 years before Judge Terrence Kern, and it's gone through many twists and turns.
Well, two lesbian couples, after that constitutional amendment was passed in the state, went to court to try to overturn it.
One of them was denied standing.
Well, one couple who, I want to get this right, there they are, a couple whose job is to help homeless teens, consulting on that. They have been together for 30 years. They got married in Canada, and then they went to California and got married, and they sued for recognition of their legal marriages, but the court decided that they hadn't actually asked for recognition of their legal marriages. They'd just gone straight to the court. So they are basically out of this.
So you got to get turned down first. You got to get
You
down.
have to actually apply.
Yes.
So the other couple has been together for 15 years. They had just a ceremony of celebration in Florida, not obviously a legal marriage, and they went to Oklahoma, and a clerk had actually applied for a marriage license, and they were turned down. So then they have standing to sue on this. They they both work for the Tulsa World newspaper there.
So Judge Kern says, basically, that denying them the license is an infringement of rights under the 14th Amendment, equal protection, even under the most lenient standard of review. He says that Oklahoma provided no rational justification for this law.
And this is interesting because we've always talked about these different standards of review, heightened scrutiny, whatever. But those sort of go circuit by circuit in the United States. We have the Ninth Circuit on the West Coast, we have the First Circuit on the East Coast, and the 10th Circuit, headquartered in Denver, has never accorded special rights to LGBT people in this sense. They have never said we're discriminated.
I would avoid that term, special rights.
I understand. I say it with some irony. But the point of heightened scrutiny is to say you are discriminated against class, therefore any law that forbids you doing something is subject to heightened scrutiny because, or more suspicion, let's say.
African Americans, for instance, get strict scrutiny, meaning you really have to have a really good reason if you're going to do anything
that excludes or discriminates against people on the basis of race. But there is no such ruling in the 10th Circuit, so all we're left with is rational basis. You can't apply heightened scrutiny. You have to say this law is so ridiculous. There is absolutely no way you can justify it. There's no rational basis. And both the federal judge in Utah, and now the federal judge in Oklahoma have said there is absolutely no rational basis for this law.
Right. So this is also in the 10th Circuit, and it may or may not be joined with the Utah appeal, which is being heard on an expedited basis right now.
I suspect that expedited basis is going to get in the way of these being I can't imagine the Oklahoma case can get to the 10th Circuit on an expedited basis at this point.
Okay.
They want papers submitted by the end of January or the first week in February.
The reasons are so obvious. Actually, one of the things the judge said in his decision, Terrence Kern, was that the legislators who passed this basically had moral objections to homosexuality,
Right.
and you cannot use that as your basis. But he said, based on the Colorado Amendment 2?
Yes.
Case of
And
1996,
Yep.
where the voters had passed a law that said you can't have gay rights laws in Colorado. And Justice Kennedy wrote that decision in 1996. And you said
Moral
you can't.
animus.
There you go. You took the words right out of my mouth.
I'm sorry, I apologize. But the difference between Oklahoma and Utah at the moment is that in Utah, the judge there let the marriages go forward. And the 10th Circuit refused to stop the marriages, and it wasn't until it got to a special appeal to the Supreme Court that they stopped the Utah marriages. In Oklahoma, perhaps because of what the Supreme Court did, the judge who wrote this brilliant decision said, you have the right to get married, but I'm not going to let it start yet until the state goes through its appeals. So that decision is stayed, as the Utah decision is stayed. But no one gets married in Oklahoma
Well, it's
until
not
this
stayed
gets...
the same way, because in the Utah case, it was only the Supreme Court that stayed it,
Yes.
not the 10th Circuit. So let me understand something.
Not the,
Right.
or the original
So,
judge.
if the Utah case is upheld, they still have to work through the Oklahoma case as well.
Well, the 10th Circuit, if they should decide in our favor on the Utah case, which is where it goes now, could sort of peremptorily say that all these laws are unconstitutional.
Summary judgment.
Yes.
Which is what we're getting a lot of places in the country. But
Here's the most moving thing that Judge Kern said in the decision, as far as I've read it. I'm only about halfway through. He said that equal protection is fundamental to our consent to be governed. That we have a system in this country where the people, government is supposed to be by the people, for the people.
Of the people, by the people, for the people.
Thank you. So the deal is, he had summed this up by saying, the people are who count, and the people decided to have a government and to abide by laws passed by the government. But one of the parts of that deal is, we'll only do that if you promise that you're going to apply these laws equally and you will not discriminate. And that is what equal protection is all about in the U.S. Constitution. And this law that Oklahoma passed does not abide by that compact, and therefore cannot stand. And I thought that was just
very
an
beautiful.
amazingly
The
beautiful.
governor disagrees.
Yes, she does. She is upset, and so is the Attorney General of Oklahoma.
So you better come up with some better arguments, or you're not going to win.
Well, they say, and this is the new line from the right wing, which is bubbling up all over the country, is that these decisions overturn the will of the people and violate the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, which says that states' rights, and violate the Windsor decision, which said that states have the right to decide on
Justice
marriage.
Kennedy, in writing the Windsor decision, and we're going to talk about Eddie Windsor in a moment, did say that this is up to the states. He did, and they are citing that.
But
they could have said right there, this is a fundamental right, and all this stuff, and all the beautiful words, but they didn't.
Well, that wasn't an issue in the Windsor case. They could have done it in the California case, but they kicked that back for standing. But what the states are ignoring in saying this is that, yes, the states have a right to decide on marriages, but they still have to follow the Constitution, and the Constitution says equal protection.
All right. Now, let's go to Utah, because here are the kind of arguments that are being made these days by these desperate right-wingers. The state's appeal in the case there says, to the 10th Circuit, says, we will not be swayed by, quote, politically correct trade associations like, get this, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, and the American Psychiatric Association. Politically correct trade associations. We will not, wait a minute, we are not ruled by experts. We're ruled by morons. I mean, I had to say that, especially since they got the Angel Moroni on the top of their cathedral there.
Except they have their own little tiny little coterie of experts, quote unquote, who they bring in who say, you know, marriage is necessary for procreation.
But I didn't think I could read anything new because they've been having a great deal of difficulty coming up with arguments against us, right?
Yeah, of
course.
course.
They have come up with a new one in Utah. Get this, folks. Let this. We value, Utah says, we as a society value diversity in education. What about diversity in marriage? And I said, what the hell does that mean? You know, blacks, whites, whatever. No. A man and a woman. That's diversity in marriage as opposed to same-sex marriage, which has no diversity. That's nutty.
I don't know.
That is nutty.
As the Y chromosome disappears.
That is nutty.
Less diversity.
Nutty.
Yes, it's extremely nutty. And the deal is that the governor of Utah announced this just as we were taping last week, so we got this in last week's show, that the state was not going to recognize the marriages already performed.
Was freezing them.
Even though he acknowledged they were legal marriages, but somehow they were going to put blinders on and not recognize them. Thousands of people went to the State House in Salt Lake to condemn him and demand that Utah...
Look, they filled up the place. It was massive, massive. This doesn't happen in New York. We have to go to Albany, of course.
Yes, that's a problem.
But this state capital is in Salt Lake City, and there they are. And they have a tradition of this there, of demonstrating in the State House, right inside the State House. And it's fantastic.
Really great. So then
Congratulations.
after this happened, or after the governor made his announcement...
By the way, they delivered 58,000 signed petitions.
Which they got in about 3 minutes after the governor announced he wasn't going to recognize these marriages. So then the question shifts to the federal government. Well, you know, they are legally married. Even the governor agrees with that, even though he's not going to recognize those marriages. What about the federal government? Will they recognize these marriages?
What about New York?
This is, wait a minute, let's start with the feds.
Okay.
This is what we fought the whole Windsor case over. You have these legally married people. Will the feds recognize them?
Well, let's hear what Attorney General of the United States, Eric Holder, has to say about it.
Okay.
Last June, the Supreme Court issued a landmark decision in United States versus Windsor, holding that Americans in same-sex marriages are entitled to equal protection and equal treatment under the law. This ruling marked a historic step towards equality for all American families. And since the day it was handed down, the Department of Justice has been working tirelessly to implement it in both letter and in spirit, moving to extend federal benefits to married same-sex couples as swiftly and smoothly as possible. Recently, an administrative step by the court has cast doubt on same-sex marriages that have been performed in the state of Utah. And the governor has announced that the state will not recognize these marriages pending additional court action. In the meantime, I am confirming today that for purposes of federal law, these marriages will be recognized as lawful and considered eligible for all relevant federal benefits on the same terms as other same-sex marriages. These families should not be asked to endure uncertainty regarding their status as the litigation unfolds. In the days ahead, we will continue to coordinate across the federal government to ensure the timely provision of every federal benefit to which Utah couples and couples throughout the country are entitled, regardless of whether they are in same-sex or opposite-sex marriages. And we will continue to provide additional information as soon as it becomes available.
Thank you, Attorney General.
Thank you. It's quite wonderful, even if it's a little low-key, to have the Attorney General of the United States make an actual video to say, we will uphold these marriages and give them benefits.
Right. And, you know, Lambda Legal says that any married Utah same-sex couple denied recognition would have a strong claim that their constitutional rights are being violated. So they're ready to bring cases.
Oh, the ACLU was advertising for couples immediately, saying, come to us, we will go to court against what the Utah governor has done, and we will sue for your right to be recognized by the state as legally married for benefits.
Speaking of Edie Windsor, you know, she's an old friend of my late friend Herb Cohen, who just died, and she was at his funeral, and she was telling me about how she finally got back Social Security because of her wife Thea. Her wife Thea died several years before here, but she was entitled to an extra benefit because Thea was
Her
a spouse
died.
and back so she got a back payment of $8,629, and she's going to get $203 more in her Social Security check because she is a surviving widow. So this is by way of saying this is obviously only she's the primary person affected by this. It was her case. So everybody is affected by this. If you have a situation where you were married and you're entitled to Social Security and all those kinds of things, it's all coming through. Social Security was a laggard in some of this stuff and recognizing some of these things.
Well, I think
in certain states.
Yeah, the question is, are you recognized in the state where you live and their rules,
Right.
or are you recognized by where your marriage was celebrated?
Right, but in this case,
but the point is there are concrete benefits, and this is what we're fighting for in this federal recognition. Then, with the Utah marriages on hold in Utah, there was some question about whether the states that do have legal same-sex marriage would recognize the Utah marriages. I would say, duh, of course they will.
Many
They're
of them have
legal
checked in, but
marriages.
some of them haven't responded to that yet.
Well, Maryland, Washington, Maine have all announced that, of course, they'll recognize those marriages. Obama announced that he welcomed the Attorney General's statement welcoming the marriages, so that's all good.
I don't think this would be happening under President Romney.
That certainly would be, well, given how he tried to stop same-sex marriage in Massachusetts when he was the governor, or prevent others from coming into Massachusetts to marry. I agree with you.
But then there's the House Republicans, led by Randy Weber of Texas. He introduced the State Marriage Defense Act, prohibiting the federal recognition of same-sex marriages of those who live in states that don't recognize them. He's got 27 sponsors. Go ahead and pass it if you want to define yourselves this way.
Again, the
Senate's not going to pass it.
This is about, he claims this is about preserving states' 10th Amendment rights. Why the hell do they even care? It's about the federal benefits, not the state benefits.
But you know, I said it's not going to pass the Senate, and obviously Obama wouldn't sign it, but the Senate is the House is going to stay Republican next year, and the Senate of the United States, folks, if you haven't been reading the papers, is very likely to go Republican.
Yeah.
Partly because a lot of states that Obama
this
lost.
year, not next year.
I'm sorry, 2014. We're already in 2014. I can't remember. And you know, there was a great series in the Times about why the Congress, even though most of us vote Democrat in House elections, is Republican, because rich people invested in Obama states to take over the state legislatures, like in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Ohio, and they did the redistricting, which they're entitled to do. But we better get on top of this, or we're not going to have any power.
So while this Texas U.S. rep has introduced this law to make, for instance, Texas not have to let a couple married in California who moved to Texas get federal benefits, the Attorney General of Texas is in his own little panic because there, as in almost every other state, there are now court cases to overturn all these state laws, and there are court cases in lawsuits in Texas. And he is now shopping for districts. He's trying to get the cases consolidated under a judge who he thinks will be friendly to him, as opposed to more like the Oklahoma and Utah judges. Frankly, I think it's going to be very hard to find a federal district judge who will not.
He's going judge shopping.
Yeah, and he's this guy, Greg Abbott, who's running for governor.
Against Wendy Davis.
Exactly.
Right.
So all of that's involved, too.
Well, you can check out all the same-sex marriage cases across the country at freedomtomarry.org. They have updates on the cases there.
On the cases, on the laws,
By
on
the
everything.
way, the House, the U.S. House, is also trying to pass a bill denying tax subsidies to women and small businesses that purchase health plans that include abortion, with an exception for rape and incest victims or the threat to the life of the mother. It's so outrageous.
These are all these conservative libertarians who think the government should get out of your lives, except when they don't want to do that. In Indiana, the fight is ongoing about the state passing a constitutional amendment against same-sex marriage.
They passed it once, they got to pass it again.
And then it would go to the voters.
This year.
So everybody figured this would be a slam dunk in the legislature, but our side has been fighting tooth and nail. They've gotten religious coalitions, business coalitions. They really are working
There were
hard to
big
stop
rallies
this.
Sunday and Monday of this week.
So the House committee in Indiana held a hearing and was expected to immediately pass the amendment and move it on to the full House. But they did not.
Well,
they delayed it. I mean, they may have eventually passed it, but corporations, churches, Republicans, universities showed up to testify on our side.
4 of the 9 Republican members of the Judiciary Committee are thought to be possible no votes. And if just 3 of those vote no, and all the Democrats unite against the bill, it does not advance. By the way, this bill—
That would be amazing.
This thing also bans recognition of relationships substantially similar to marriage.
One wonders what that could be. I'm just messing with you. All right, in South Carolina Equality, the LGBT group there, has formally asked the state to let same-sex married couples who are married elsewhere file taxes equally. And in Colorado, a Senate committee there has moved ahead a bill that would let same-sex couples married elsewhere file state taxes as married. We remember the governor of Missouri has already ordered his state to let same-sex couples married elsewhere file as married in the state, even though each of these states forbid same-sex marriage.
Now, in Virginia, Republicans there are blocking any consideration of a bill to repeal the constitutional amendment versus same-sex marriage. They overwhelmingly control the House of Delegates there. The Senate there is in the balance. There's a special election because the Attorney General, guy who got elected Attorney General, was a state senator, and that will determine the balance of power, who replaces him in the state Senate. So no progress in Virginia.
And in Missouri, 4 right-wingers are suing to stop Governor Nixon's executive order to allow same-sex married couples to file.
Now in Ohio, this is one of those Catholic school stories. This is in Sandusky, Ohio. A music teacher, we have a picture of him there, Brian Panetta, he's there on the left in the picture. He was fired for getting engaged to his male partner. Now, he calls himself a proud gay Catholic, so he resigned over this when he was essentially,
He was forced out.
He was forced out. But it's, you ain't going to have anybody, you certainly aren't going to have anybody to run the music program.
Well, if there are as many gay teachers as there are gay priests,
yes,
the Catholic schools are going to be
unpopulated. But the priests, so far, can't get married.
Well, they're hanging in there with their closeted status, most of them, but the teachers are all being outed.
Well, I mean, you bring that up. We lost over the last couple of weeks Father Robert Nugent. He was one of the co-founders of New Ways Ministry. He was, all he tried to do was say we need to show more compassion for gay people, and the guy who became Pope Benedict, Ratzinger, said, this is erroneous and dangerous. We have to be mean to them. How do you think I stayed in the closet all these years?
Exactly.
And anyway, he was basically taken out of the ministry in 1999 with Sister Janine Gramick, who we co-founded it with. I mean, they weren't even challenging the church teaching explicitly.
No, they were very mild.
And they still got canned.
Well,
but he passed away this week.
Here's a ray of hope, sort of, in a backhanded way. In Alexandria, Indiana, the United Methodist Church there got rid of a new minister, or the new minister got rid of a bisexual choir director there.
Choir director? What did I say?
80% of the congregation walked out of the church.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The new minister wasn't comfortable.
Yeah, exactly. Probably a closet case. In Idaho, just to wrap up these tax filing things, they have decided that out-of-state married same-sex couples have to file separately. But there was a big rally in Boise where our side showed up to complain about that and to demand a non-discrimination law in Idaho, a Sonda Genda Non-Discrimination Act.
And you may remember that we told you that one of the stars of 30 Rock, Maulik Pancholi, we have a picture of him, announced his engagement to his partner of 9 years, Ryan Corvea, last week. They did it at the Taj Mahal. Now, Maulik is of Indian descent. He's not from India, but the fact that they're doing it there, I think, is significant because this is a country that just reaffirmed a sodomy ban, guys, and I think that makes kind of a statement.
Yes, exactly. All right, other news. Bad story out of California, Contra Costa, California, where a young transgender woman, 16 years old, is being prosecuted because she fought back against bullies who were attacking her at school.
Her name is Jules Gutierrez. The district attorney, Dan Cabral, is charging her with battery for taking the law into her own hands. She was defending herself. She was clearly being beaten on a videotape that's circulating. And then he says, for us to pick and choose who we charge under these circumstances would be a violation of the 14th Amendment. You're supposed to figure out who's at fault and who's the aggressor and who's defending themselves.
Choose the people who attacked her.
Yes. Oh, it's so disheartening.
Well, in an even worse case that happened in Minnesota a couple of years ago, Cece McDonald had been walking down the street late at night with a group of friends, and a bunch of guys attacked her with a lot of slurs and violence, and a fight broke out, and she ended up killing one of the attackers. And
in the process of defending herself.
Exactly. And she was...
What happened to stand your ground?
Well, it only applies to certain people. She went to prison.
For she was given a 41-month term, but she served 19 months in a men's prison.
Yes. And was just released. Laverne Cox, transgender star of Orange is the New Black, showed up at the prison in Minneapolis to greet her when she came out.
Well, Laverne Cox also showed up on the Katie Couric show, right?
Yes.
Katie Couric had trans model Carmen Carrera and actress Laverne Cox on, and tried to. Katie keeps trying to ask, basically, do you have a penis? I mean,
Have
Katie
you had
wants
surgery?
to know.
What's your body
I'm surprised
like?
she didn't go over there and she was obsessed with it.
Yeah.
What's down there? What she said was, your private parts are different now, aren't they? And
to their
Carmen said, that is personal.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
a person.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the real issues around being transgender in this society, rather than examining my private parts. So Katie then, the next day or shortly thereafter, did a follow-up on that and other stories and said how much she appreciated the guests for providing a teachable moment for me and the viewers.
Yep.
I'm proud to have had this moment.
What did you learn, Katie?
Well, the transgender community is still quite upset at Katie for this.
We have never done this to a transgender guest on this show. Nor would we.
Let's keep that record intact.
Now, if you thought we were going to get through this week without talking about Governor Chris Christie, I know you're sick of it. But
I'm not sick of it.
No, I'm not. Well, it's all that they do on MSNBC these days.
Good.
It's all they do.
That's why it's convenient to tune in at any hour.
That's true, because it's the same show each time. Anyway, you may have...
get little bits and pieces.
Anyway, this guy, he's the governor of New Jersey. You might have heard of him. He vetoed a bill last week to make it easier for transgender people to obtain a gender marker change on their birth certificate. In the veto statement, he says that the less stringent standards create the potential for fraud and abuse. You ought to know something about that, Chris.
He says we already have streamlined guidelines, and like Katie Couric, he wanted to know whether they'd had surgery or not, because the proposed bill said they didn't have to prove that.
Right.
And in California, we've been following the progress of the attempt to repeal the transgender student rights bill, the spot check of petition signatures has proved that, has decided that 95%
Met
of
a
them.
threshold.
Yes, so that they now move on to an actual count of all the signatures to see whether they have enough to go to a referendum. Several schools of thought on this. One is that, yes, they passed the threshold to go to the full count, but it wasn't close enough that they think there will be
Right.
a large
We'll
jump
see.
to getting it approved.
I'll leave that to the statisticians.
Yes.
In Florida, the LGBT rights bill there has gotten support from the Disney company and 5 other big employers in the state. And Nadine Smith of Equality Florida calls this a tipping point for the bill.
That and the candidacy of Charlie Crist.
We'll see.
In New York City, all the LGBT Democratic clubs have written a letter to the new mayor, Bill de Blasio, saying they want to meet with him and talk about police relations with the LGBT community, education issues. Yes, it'd be nice to have something in the schools. HIV/AIDS housing, transgender rights, and harassment on the streets.
No, he's on the record
cops.
about a lot of those things from the campaign.
Yeah.
We have a correction from last week about the Rose Parade.
Well, yes and no. A viewer said, you said the networks didn't show the wedding, and yes,
they
they
cut
did,
away.
or didn't.
Well, Al Roker did say in their coverage, a sincere shout out to the newlyweds and the happy couple on the float.
Yeah, but here's my point, which I rushed through last week, so let me take 1 second to clarify this. Yes, he said that, but my point is they read it off a card. Nothing could have been less sincere. It was read as if it were, you know, traffic instructions or something. It was...
You want him to have sincere... He's pro-gay, Al.
Maybe he is, but on this broadcast, I'm saying that both NBC and HGTV spent about 2.5 seconds on this float. Our viewer will correct me because it was, I'm exaggerating, but it was a very minimal amount of time. No enthusiasm about this.
HGTV said, in their quote, Danny LeClaire and Aubrey Lutz are just about to say, I do, love conquers all, and showed a close-up of the couple.
Again, very perfunctory, not, you know, sounded as if they were rushing through it.
We only showed a picture of them from a distance on the Gay USA show.
Well, we showed the whole float. I take the viewer's point about actual accuracy.
And we appreciate all corrections that come our way. Thank you. And that one was from Alabama, and the viewer wants us to know that there are a lot of liberals in Alabama, which I don't doubt.
Absolutely, of course there are.
Speaking of which, Alabama State University has a new president, Gwendolyn Boyd, and her contract says that she must live in the president's residence and may not cohabitate with anyone in there in a romantic relationship. And she said, well, I do live alone, so it's not a problem for me. But a lawyer who specializes in these contracts said he had never seen such a clause like this, and he doesn't know how they're going to enforce it.
Well, in custody battles, we've heard case after case of agreements where one divorcing spouse is not allowed to cohabit.
This woman's not allowed to have anybody over.
Well, is that cohabiting?
Well, or for the night.
Yeah.
Is that cohabitation?
To me, cohabitation is a longer period of setting up housekeeping.
We'll leave that. I don't know Alabama.
Viewers?
I don't know Alabama law.
Yeah. Well, here's something from, again, Florida. We had told you that Senator Marco Rubio was trying to hold up Obama's nomination of an out gay African-American judge, William Thomas, to a federal court in Miami. And in fact, Marco Rubio has stood fast against this guy, and he is not being renominated.
He uses something called the blue slip because the judge is from his state. And if you're the senator from that state, first of all, usually you recommend the person, and he did.
He did.
And then you're allowed to have a blue slip, which says he can't go through. So there's actually a movement afoot to end this blue slip thing where one senator gets to say that the person can't be a judge.
What happened to states' rights? Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe was sworn in, new Democratic governor. He immediately, his first act was to sign a non-discrimination executive order for state employees.
Covering sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. They had this before under Democratic governors, a couple of them, and the last
the
governor
Republicans wiped it out.
What was his name?
McDonnell. McDonnell was the governor, and Cuccinelli was the attorney general.
Oh, Cuccinelli.
Now, the question in Virginia, they have several lawsuits going for same-sex marriage there, and since the Democrats have now taken over the state offices, will they pull out of defending the constitutional amendments in the state against same-sex marriage?
We don't know yet.
We do not.
We do know that there's a campaign to get Bayard Rustin, the great civil rights leader who was gay, on a stamp, and that it's going to be launched at NGLTF's Creating Change conference in Houston in late January.
And we do know that a record crowd showed up for the inauguration of Ed Murray as the out gay mayor of Seattle.
All those Catholic school kids came, I bet, because he came out to support them.
Plus, perhaps some workers who appreciate his push for a $15 minimum wage.
I'm for that.
I'm for that, too.
In Maryland, the trans rights bill was reintroduced. It passed the House of Delegates in 2011, but died in the Senate 6-5 last March. The New York bill, by the way, on that is stalled. But we've also got a bill to ban ex-gay therapy in New York, which hasn't been going anywhere. I didn't really see any plans to do something with it.
And we're not very happy with our new Mayor de Blasio's enthusiasm at sitting down with Cardinal Dolan.
Yeah, given the fact that the Cardinal thinks that gay people are intrinsically
and
disordered.
saying we got to get this new Pope to visit New York.
Oh, God. Well,
and we note a couple of, we had a long list of deaths last week. We have a couple this week. Peggy Traub, 55 years old, 55. Long battle with cancer, survived by her widow, Phyllis Dicker. Peggy was a great philanthropist involved with many LGBT organizations. She was the daughter of the CEO and president of Bloomingdale's, Marvin Traub.
An old friend of Ronald Reagan's and Nancy Reagan's.
And she was a great business entrepreneur herself, but she really supported, the
Rainbow Scholarship, but she also co-founded Women in the Home Industry. She was in the furniture business.
Yeah.
And so she was very active in getting women organized within that trade.
But supported the National Center for Lesbian Rights and the Gay Community Center here and the Gay Synagogue and GLAAD and lots of others. She was a fundamental philanthropist in the community.
And in Nevada, a guy named Vincent Frey, F-R-E-Y.
Frey.
A longtime Nevada activist, much beloved.
Director of the LGBT Center there.
He died.
You started to say that.
He died January 3rd, suddenly after a very brief illness.
At 46, and his funeral was an SRO event.
Okay, and at the University of Colorado, did we do this at the University of Colorado at Denver? They're not going to seek dismissal of an administrator who ran a phone sex line. Raisa Cooper Morning is her name, I think her name. She's the university's diversity coordinator, had been placed on leave, but the university determined her outside work was not criminal.
We have only 5 minutes left,
we
better run. Russia. A Russian Orthodox priest has joined the Not TV host in pushing for recriminalization of homosexuality. Doesn't seem to be happening yet.
State Department issued a travel alert on Sochi. In addition to warnings about terrorism, crime, and an untested medical system, they're warning LGBT people about the anti-LGBT laws. And they're also telling you that lodging is running at $750 to $1,000 a night.
Masha Gessen has written a new book about Pussy Riot. Words Will Break Cement, The Passion of Pussy Riot, very nicely reviewed in the New York Times.
Outgay Ian McKellen and 27 Nobel laureates are demanding the repeal of this regressive anti-gay law.
One of them is a childhood or school friend of Ian McKellen, Harold Kroto, who won the Nobel in chemistry in 1996. He's going to make one more visit to Russia to speak out against the laws, and then he's never going back. These are a lot of science Nobel laureates. It's great.
We told you about all the attacks on the big gay bar in Moscow Central Station. Well, the manager of that club, Arkady Ging-Azan, is seeking asylum in the United States. The bar, he feels like his life is in danger.
Demonstrations against the U.S. Olympic Committee in Boston this week by Queer Nation and Get Equal. They went after members of the committee at a breakfast. They held our big banner, which we sent up to them. You can expect more of that, particularly in Las Vegas this Saturday at the Curling Championships. If you want to get involved in these demonstrations, look for the Curling Championships in Las Vegas this Saturday. And here in New York this weekend, there's a festival at Cooper Union Saturday and Sunday, Propaganda, a festival celebrating Russian voices. Sunday, Masha Gessen will be appearing and speaking and whatever. The leader of Occupy Pedophilia, the guy who was luring and beating up gay people in Russia, is now in Cuba. He may be fleeing a little prosecution.
Okay.
AIDS news. The New York State Department of Health has finally issued its long-awaited guidelines for PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis.
Truvada.
Taking the Truvada pill.
Well, it was approved in June of 2012
by the FDA.
And the guy, so ACT UP was threatening a demonstration. I don't know if they're still going to demonstrate on January 21st.
To read the guidelines, go to hivguidelines.org, and you can get all the details of that. There are, mixed reasons. We'll talk to Sean Strub more about that next week, I'm sure.
At the entertainment news. At the Golden Globes, Matthew McConaughey and Jared Leto won acting awards for Dallas Buyers Club, which is it's an AIDS movie, but they got through all their speeches without once mentioning AIDS.
Yeah, Jared Leto said to all the rayons out there,
which is his character,
thank you, or something, which was, but he didn't even say transsexual or transgender. I find, it's not my favorite movie, and certainly not my favorite is the best TV comedy, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which we looked at originally because Andre Braugher is playing this out gay captain. And I watched it again after the Golden Globes. Even worse, and they seem to have buried the gay stuff.
But then there's She Is King.
But I love Jackie Bissett, and I will forgive her anything.
We saw a play at the Incubator Arts Project, She Is King. It's a kind of a clever recreation of several key TV interviews that Billie Jean King did back in the 70s?
70s and 80s.
80s, yeah, 80. It was created and acted by Larissa Husiak. It does the match after Bobby Riggs, and it does also after her Galimony suit, where she's very good on like women's stuff and all that kind of stuff, and she was so terrible in those days talking about gay stuff, sitting there with her husband. It was, I think it's very well done.
Hilarious interview with Tony Tennille recreated, and then the one with Barbara Walters.
Both played by Louise Bradshaw.
Yeah.
I also saw King Lear. It's a very, very hard play. This is from the Chichester Festival with Frank Langella. I would call it serviceable, which is not knocking it because at least you can understand it. And I'll have a full review in the Gay City News.
Look for the new Gay in San Francisco series Looking on HBO this weekend. Getting decent reviews. Also getting decent reviews, a new cartoon gay series on FX called Chosen, about a gay white hip-hop rapper.
Okay.
And The Fosters is back on ABC Family.
And Sean Strub on next week's show to talk about his new book, the former editor and founder of Paz magazine.
Bye. See you next week.